Hello and welcome. I am Dr. Sana Hashmi, and in this week's edition of Print Eye on China column, I discuss the latest Chinese official stance on the India-China border dispute, as well as the recent Chinese announcement on the troop disengagement. So, when we talk about, and this has been happening for almost 5 years now, and when we talk about India-China boundary dispute, I think it's very important to be clear that the dispute is one of the thorniest issues in the relationship. This is the primary bone of contention between India and China. And it has been a source of tension for decades, of course, for at least 70 years now. And every time we think there might be a breakthrough on the border front, the situation just seems to get more complicated. And of course, we have seen since Galwan clashes, India-China relation, as our Minister of External Affairs has been saying that the status of relation has been abnormal between India and China. And this is something that we have been seeing specifically since the Galwan clashes. But recently, Chinese Defense Ministry came up with a statement and said that both sides could reduce differences and build some consensus on troop disengagement in eastern Ladakh. So, of course, this announcement, and of course, there has been a number of perhaps some news reports as well as some analysis that indicates that there might be some kind of rapprochement between India and China. But of course, when it comes from the Chinese side and we see a Chinese official statement, it sounds like a step forward, right? Maybe it is, maybe it is not. It does hint at a possible thaw in relations between India and China. But I do feel if we dig deeper, things aren't quite as rosy as they might appear. So, as also we are seeing some other news, and as winter is approaching and troops on the at the LSE are being deployed, we are reminded that despite all these statements and all the open channels of negotiation, this is something that we have seen since 2020. That no matter what, the channel of communication at the diplomatic and military level has been open, even though Prime Minister Narendra Modi hasn't had a one-on-one meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping since 2019. But despite that, the communication is on, the negotiations are on. Uh, and but of course the talks are going on, but the real issue that remains between India and China is, of course, the trust or lack of it. And the statements from China might sound optimistic, and this is something that we are also seeing in a lot of media analysis and a lot of strategic community scholars analysis from both Indian side as well as the Chinese side. But there's no denying that there's a massive trust deficit between the two countries, and that has been very hard to bridge, and this is not something that could be achieved easily. So even if both sides agree to pull back a few steps back, the deeper issues around the border security and historical grievances remain unresolved, and that is where the real problem lies. And I have, for this particular column, I have analyzed what is the discourse in China, what is the discourse in the Chinese media and the strategic community about the border dispute and about the India-China relationship. And an analysis of Chinese media and strategic discussions reveal that there is a perception that India is now adopting a more conciliatory tone towards China. And many within the Chinese media and strategic community suggest that India is now realizing its confrontational stance could hurt its economic interest, and especially in the field of manufacturing, which has taken a hit due to tough policies on China. This is something that has been a common point of discussion within Chinese media, social media community. And there is also a perception that India is now trying to strike a balance. India is now seeking Chinese investment to boost its economy while also aligning with regional groupings such as BRICS, SCO, as well as the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue. And I feel that this is something that's happening, and the discussion is primarily on since in April, when Prime Minister Narendra Modi talked about potential normalization in the relationship, and as well as the recent statement from External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar, who put it, India can chew gum while walking. He said it while he was in the US. He's still in the US, in one of the think tanks. So that actually meant that engaging with China while staying true to its other international commitments, such as Quad, such as engagement with other Western countries, like minded countries. And this statement is also being analyzed in Chinese media and scholarly community. And it's actually being seen as something that's positive, that India is kind of engaging with both the world, the Western world, as well as China, Russia, and some of the countries that do not really have good relations with the West. Um, but while this is being appreciated, this is being seen as a positive development by some in the strategic community. Not everyone in the media and Chinese strategic community believe that this wall riding diplomacy will work in India's favor in the long term, and India has to take side. India has to decide where it wants to lean towards more. Then Chinese analysts also remain skeptical about India's ability to catch up to China, especially in manufacturing, given India's lack of infrastructure and technology. And I feel that this is more about perhaps the analyzing and highlighting the competition between India and China, how India has been kind of put forth as an alternative to China. So, but interestingly, there is also a softening in China's approach too, with some acknowledging India's genuine interest in resolving differences, primarily focusing on other aspects other than the border dispute, primarily the economic and commercial interest. And this is being perceived as possibly because of India's own economic struggle. This is something that has been talked about within the Chinese strategic community as well, that India is now reaching out to China primarily to gain economic benefits, primarily to gain more investment from the Chinese side. But on platforms like Weibo, some Chinese users also suggest that China should help India improve its industrial capacity, yet others fear that strengthening India might one day come back to bite China, because you do not really help your adversary, and India is now being recognized as one of China's main adversaries, specifically within the Chinese media and the social media platforms, such as Weibo and WeChat. So there's even debate over Chinese state-owned enterprises helping build India's largest steel furnace, with some questioning whether China is inadvertently strengthening its regional competitor. So I think this is something that is kind of being also discussed on primarily on Weibo and WeChat. So Chinese official narrative around the border, we have seen that it's pretty clear, and they have been saying that it continues to assert its territorial claims, especially over Arunachal Pradesh, and they also call India's position illegal. And this statement just came a few days after the statement from the Chinese Defense Ministry. So we really see that there is definitely uh, disparity between what China says and what is actually doing. So while China talks about moving beyond the border dispute, its repeated focus on territorial claims, I feel that is just a distraction, especially as China portrays India as the one that is eager for economic normalization, and it benefits India more than China. So I do believe that this is something that China is trying to establish a particular narrative that only benefits China. So I do believe that we have to take whatever coming out from China with a pinch of salt. So I feel that in this context, what is the reality? What is actually happening? And where is the discourse moving towards with respect to India-China relations? So the India-China discourse from both sides actually is kind of stuck in a tug of war between economic opportunities and political distrust. And as both countries try to de-escalate tensions, but of course the approaches and the intent of both the countries are very different from each other. There is more divergence than convergence in terms of approaches, as well as intent and objectives and interests, and how do they see the future, the prospects of India China relationship. So the fundamental issues, territorial and strategic, continue to complicate any real progress in the relationship. So China, and I do believe that if we move ahead with any sort of rapprochement, any sort of thaw in the relationship, China has to understand that this approach cannot go longer uh, if it is not willing to address India's territorial concerns, and this is just not viable in the long run. And for India, in the long term, security concerns definitely trump any potential economic benefits. And I think this is not going to change in times to come as well. So the question remains here, how long can this diplomatic dance last before something gives away? And I do, of course, believe that time will tell how the India China relation is going to be in the near future. But of course, if the main concern of India is not addressed, the relationship between India and China is definitely going to be stuck in this state, in this abnormal state, as our external affairs minister has already put it. So I do believe that the ball is in China's court. And if China really wishes to have any sort of normalization in the relationship, it has to focus on what India wants and what is in the interest of India, and has to focus on India's security concerns. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next week.